Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I am literally so thrilled to have you here today. Together, we are going to embark on an absolutely incredible journey, tracing the very roots of human thought. We'll be traveling all the way from the ancient wisdom of early sages right up to the modern framework of philosophical inquiry. It's a massive, super fascinating topic, and I promise you, by the time we wrap up this lecture, you're going to see the world just a little bit differently. So let's dive right into this. Here is our game plan for today. We'll start by defining the undefinable, which is philosophy itself. Then we'll take a global tour of the sage tradition, explore the absolutely vital roles of early women in philosophy, and watch how early thinkers actually evolved into the very first natural scientists. And finally, we'll wrap the whole thing up by looking at how all these concepts hang together today. Section 1, Defining the Undefinable. Right out of the gate, I want to acknowledge the inherent awkwardness of the subject we're tackling today. Philosophy is unique because, honestly, it has absolutely no boundaries. So I want to ask you directly, what is philosophy? When you hear that word, what actually comes to mind? Is it some old guy with a long beard sitting on a rock? Or maybe a super complicated, dusty book of logic? Well, the truth is, it's all of that and a whole lot more. Philosophy has no boundaries, and it doesn't allow for basic assumptions. It considers literally everything, from nature and consciousness to morality and society. Now, I know this open-endedness makes the whole concept a bit confusing at first. Think about it. If you open a biology textbook, you know for sure you're studying the science of living things. Biology has a specific scope. It has a strict experimental method. Philosophy? It doesn't have those strict guardrails. It's essentially an attempt to gain the broadest, most fundamental conception of the world around us. And this boundaryless pursuit is actually built into the very origins of the word itself. The word philosophy derives from the ancient Greek philia, meaning lover or pursuer, and sophia, meaning wisdom. But what's really fascinating here is that the earliest Greek philosophers weren't even called philosophers at all. They were known as sages. And this brilliantly illustrates a massive global connection. If you look at the Chinese concept of the sage, or sheng, the written script for it prominently features the symbol of an ear, because early sages were, quite literally, listeners. They were the ones who listened to the heavens or divine insight, and then took that pursued wisdom and shared it to actually benefit society. Section 2, the global sage tradition. I want to make something super clear right now. Philosophy is a foundational human activity. It is not just some modern Western invention. The sage tradition emerged globally. Over in India, you had figures like Manu and the Saptarishi, who lived these intense monastic lives and authored the ancient Vedas. In China, sages like Confucius weren't just thinkers, they were celebrated as technological discoverers and incredibly wise rulers. In Africa, folk sages utilized rigorous rational inquiry to critically analyze their own cultural beliefs, keeping a healthy intellectual distance. And in Greece, sages like Thales were powerful political reformers and mathematicians. The key takeaway here? Across every single region, early humans were aggressively applying reason to understand nature and their societies. Section 3, Early Women of Philosophy. Okay, so we really need to shift our focus to a history that honestly gets overlooked way too often in standard textbooks. The societies we just talked about, ancient Greece, India, and China, were highly, highly patriarchal. They very often confined women to dependent, subservient roles, and definitely didn't provide many opportunities for public philosophical debate. Yet, despite these literally massive societal barriers, brilliant women still broke through. They achieved incredible levels of philosophical enlightenment and were major drivers of scientific discovery. Let's just rattle off a few of these absolutely powerhouse resumes. In the ancient Indian Vedic tradition, we have Gosha. She devoted herself to intense spiritual practices to heal a debilitating skin condition. Then there's Maitreyi, an ascetic, who actually composed 10 of the hymns in the oldest Vedic text, the Rig Veda, and she fiercely debated the uselessness of material attachment. You also have Gargi, who is characterized as one of the most knowledgeable sages of her entire era, actively debating natural philosophy and the fundamental forces of the universe. Over in ancient Greece, inside the famous Pythagorean school, we find Theano. She made critical discoveries in numbers and optics and authored a major treatise on piety. And her daughter Maya, she brilliantly applied all that complex mathematical Pythagorean philosophy to the practical, everyday realities of motherhood. I mean, these women were an absolute force, driving both high-level spiritual teachings and very practical, hands-on science. Section 4. The First Natural Scientists. To really understand the shift from this broad wisdom into hardcore mathematical exactness, we've got to talk about the wild resume of the Greek sage Thales of Miletus. This guy traveled to Egypt just to study astronomy. He created a 365-day calendar. He even calculated the height of the Egyptian pyramids using the geometry of Shitos. He also made the pretty bold claim that all matter was fundamentally just water. But my absolute favorite story about Thales, well, back then, people used to tease philosophers, basically saying, hey, your theories are totally useless in the real world. So, to prove them all wrong, Thales used his deep knowledge of weather patterns to predict an unusually massive olive crop. Before the season started, he bought up the rights to all the local olive presses for dirt cheap. And when that huge harvest came in, he made an absolute fortune. Early philosophy translated directly into real-world practical success. And Thales' mathematical exactness reached an absolute peak in the year 585 BCE. In this specific year, Thales successfully predicted a solar eclipse. And get this, the eclipse famously occurred right smack in the middle of a literal battle between the Medes and the Lydians. Think about the incredible mathematical rigor you'd need to pull off a prediction like that in the ancient world. Following Thales, early thinkers completely shifted how humanity viewed the world. They started searching for actual underlying mechanisms rather than just accepting old myths. Xenophans realized that rainbows were simply apparitions of clouds, not some kind of magic. Parmenides used strict, unyielding logic to study the very nature of existence and change. And Democritus? This is mind-blowing. He reasoned that underlying all perceived reality were tiny, unchanging bits of matter flowing through a void. Yep, he conceptualized atoms thousands of years before modern chemistry. This is a perfect example of how early philosophical inquiry quite literally birthed scientific explanation. And obviously, we can't talk about early science without dropping Pythagoras' name. You probably remember him from the Pythagorean theorem about right-angled triangles in math class. But Pythagoras went way further than that. He saw that the intervals between musical notes corresponded perfectly to math. He saw deep regularities in the movements of the stars. He basically reasoned that all of nature is generated according to mathematical regularities. These philosophers were on a mission. They were seeking a unified, entirely rational structure to the whole universe. Section 5. How things hang together. So we've covered the history, right? But how do we put this into a practical framework for you today? Well, the 20th century philosopher Wilfrid Sellars provided what I consider to be the ultimate thesis statement for what philosophers actually do. He said, the aim of philosophy, abstractly formulated, is to understand how things in the broadest possible sense of the term hang together in the broadest possible sense of the term. In short, philosophers want to understand the whole shebang, not just the isolated tiny pieces, but how all those pieces fit together. To actually pull this off, Sellars distinguishes between two very different types of knowledge. First, we have knowing that. This is your basic factual knowledge. It's memorizing specific data points. For instance, you could theoretically count every single grain of sand on a beach to know the exact number. That is a fact. You know that. But is it useful? Does it actually help you understand the world? Not really. Then, on the other hand, we have knowing how. Sellars argues that philosophical skill is a kind of know-how. It's a highly practical and gauged conceptual skill. Think of it exactly like the physical skill of riding a bike or swimming. You don't just sit there and memorize the physics of a bicycle, right? You get on it and you learn how to balance, pedal, and steer, all at once. I absolutely love the analogy Sellars uses here. Just as a seasoned fisherman knows exactly where to cast his line to catch the fish, and just as importantly, which empty waters to avoid entirely, a philosopher knows where to look in the vast, overwhelming world of concepts. They skillfully navigate how ideas connect, how they support one another, and how they rely on each other to form that big picture. Sellars tells us this know-how is absolutely crucial when we try to reconcile two very, very different pictures of our reality. First, there is the manifest image. That's the natural world as you and I directly observe it every single day. It's the feeling of a solid wooden table, the warmth of the sun on your skin, the emotional experience of being human. Then you have the scientific image. This is the world explained entirely by underlying invisible mechanisms, Democritus's atoms, unseen gravitational forces, neuroscience, cellular biology. Philosophy's ultimate goal? It's to figure out exactly how these two radically distinct pictures fit together into one cohesive, logical reality. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a challenge to help you start practicing your very own philosophical know-how. Look around you today. how do the manifest and scientific images of our world hang together for you? When you look at a tree in your yard or your smartphone or even your best friends, how do you reconcile your everyday human experience of them with those invisible scientific mechanisms that are actually making them tick? Thinking about that question right there, well, that is the true beginning